Hi everyone. So I'm Arzu ltekin. I have prepared this talk along with my co-worker, PhD candidate Ismini Loka, soon to be doctor. She's sitting right there. Ismini, can you get up so people can see you as well? So half of the slides are hers. I might have to acknowledge from the beginning. All right, as you see behind me, as I actually introduce myself and Ismini, the population predictions for the next 20 and 30 years are really in favor of getting more and more people over the age of 60, 65. This is a global trend, more on the first world and then followed by the others as well. The research that I do is not only about aging, I will also give a little flavor of that towards the end of the talk, but I have done one healthy aging project with the SNF, that's the I think this one should be no, okay, I'll maybe just use this one. Do you see it? Right, you do. Sorry about that. So this was an SNF-funded project with the healthy aging, and that's to do with navigation. And currently, we also have an unhealthy aging project that's funded by InnoSwiss. I've done my SNF project mainly in the University of Zurich, and then I switched to FHNW in the middle. So I'm also hosted and supported by these organizations. If the map doesn't actually give you the impression, I also put it in the numbers. So if you say population over 60 global, that's what you see. And I'll give you a minute to digest this. So at the moment, we have 962 million people. This was doubled in the last, from 1980 to last year. And it's expected to double again in 2050. That is then going to be 2.1 billion people. That's when I'm going to be 75, and I think many of you in the room. I don't see many 70-year-olds right now in there. So this is going to be a really large portion of every society. And to make this point even clearer, it is the pyramid that we used to see is no longer a pyramid, and this is really changing. The birth rates are falling, and we are living longer. And because of the fabric of the society switching and changing to older age groups, we have to worry about functioning in the old age for both the reasons that we want to function and also for the reasons that we might never get to retire. It is possible that there's not enough young people replacing the working population. So this will be about when I'm 75. At the moment, we are accessing information. I feel comfortable accessing information. I use computers. I'm in a computer science department. I use smartphones. And I wanted to ask you if there's anyone in the room who doesn't have a smartphone. One person is kind of half waving their hand. So this is kind of the mode of operation. And why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of the older people are actually not using them. This is the US population. So you have cell phone of any kind, and you have smartphones here, and this is 2016 data. And as you go with the age brackets, it goes actually stepwise, smaller and smaller percentage. This is 75 years old today. Something like 30% of them use smartphones. And my father is 75 this year, and he has a smartphone, and he sometimes struggles answering the phone because the different programs actually tend to move the answering interaction differently. So if you have Skype or WhatsApp or regular phone, sometimes you have to pull it this way, sometimes this way. So he's struggling. He was once tech savvy. When he was younger, he was explaining people about the televisions and radio and telling them that these are not real little people in the television. And so this changed. So I sometimes, quite selfishly, worry about what happens when I'm 75. What is the future of access to information, and what will we have to deal with? And all 2.1 billion of us. So one of the dominant paradigms that seems to be coming up is that perhaps it will be augmented and virtual reality. Maybe it will be wearable computers. We will have projection displays. We will have interactions that work like that. I really like her face. She's like, So I guess the question from the perspective of human-computer interaction and design is that are we able to deal with this kind of new paradigms, and are we able to adapt, and can we design them so that it is inclusive of also people that are of a certain age? Now, why do we focus on people of certain age other than the fact that we are going to be 2.1 billion when I'm old, and probably many of you are in more or less plus minus 5 years, 10 years bracket here? This is what happens when you age. So this is the short-term memory, and this is the working memory, this is long-term memory, and this is speed of processing. This is when you are in your 20s, this is when you are in your 80s, and you see the linear creeping down. So if you're in your 20s, enjoy them now. The senior moments are real, and they are coming. Well, one good news, I want to finish with that, is that experience-based verbal knowledge is supposedly also real, so wisdom is there. So that remains, it actually grows, and it's stable, and it gets better over time. This also means that because of this tendency of memory capacity going actually down, and I think you all feel that. I'm trying to learn German after I was 33 years old, and it's not going really well, as you can see. And this is the information overload versus the cognitive load, right? So you have your cognitive resources are going down, and there's more and more information is coming up. And this don't match really well. It's a problem, so you have to somehow organize and design so that the information is actually delivered as needed and when it's relevant. Now, when I was showing this graphic, I have to also say that people tend to, how do they cope with this, is that they tend to prioritize quite unconsciously. You know older people, they function quite well, right? So what happens is that they tend to prioritize what to remember. So they remember the important things, and they drop out things that seem relevant or that you can externalize or get help later. But even if you're not old, this concept of information overload and the inverted U curve is quite well established. So if you have too little information, you make bad decisions. If you have too much information, you also make bad decisions. There's a kind of sweet spot, and I think that corresponds to what people can handle. This graph comes from some organization science, but it replicates itself in many other disciplines. So when we talk about cognition and information overload, I come from a sort of a visualization background. So I've studied geographic information science originally, and then I turned to computer science more and more. But one way of dealing with a lot of information is to visually display them. Visualizations help. It's a summary. It actually is easier for us to digest. Humans are very visual beings, but visualizations can also overwhelm. So this is also, you have to also design them well. So a lot of, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. That's what happens, and that's what we are experiencing. And this comes, how do you control this? What is that sweet spot? It comes from a theory from 1950s. So this is a paper from 1956. It's one of my favorite papers. I love the language of it. It's called The Magical Number 7, plus minus 2. Anyone who studied psychology in the room might actually recognize this. This is to do with information processing capacity of humans. So you can the working memory, so the current processing of information, you can keep about 7 words in mind, or 7 numbers in mind, or 7 changes in mind. That is for instant processing. And from that, it goes to the long-term memory. So this is, according to this paper, it's 7 plus minus 2. So this is the playful language. My problem is that I have been persecuted by an integer. For 7 years, this number has followed me around, intruded me in my most private data, and assaulted me from the pages of our most public journals. So it just keeps talking in this kind of playful language, and then it demonstrates that this is true for visual, graphic, numerical, verbal memory, that it's somewhere around 7. More modern studies say that it's actually 4, that he was optimistic. He had this like number of the telephone numbers that like you have 7 digits in the phone numbers, but if you have 7 digits, what do? You do 3, 2, and 2. That's easier than saying all 7 of them together, right? This is like a human cognitive capacity thing. But that plus minus 2 matters quite a lot too. So there's individual and group differences between people, depending on their background, often comes with professional education, socialization, whether you play a lot outside, whether you have some spatial STEM kind of sciences. So this is a very interesting, very simple psychological test. It's developed by a Swiss scientist called Piaget. He was looking at children's development, and he was showing people a bottle and telling them, imagine that the bottle is half full, where would the water level be if you tilt the bottle? So they were supposed to draw a line. And this is what they do. So some people draw it like this, almost explainable. You know, you take the bottom of the bottle as a reference, and you forget that water is liquid. And some of them are harder to explain. This is from my own studies, from high school students, and I have all variations. It's very interesting. It's either you don't understand the instruction, or you don't understand the physics, or you have a problem drawing it. And that's the drawing part that says your spatial abilities, mental rotation maybe is not very good. And this really simple test tends to predict how well people read maps, for example, or how they can orient in the field. And the person that I learned this test from was an American psychologist called Lynn Libben. And she tested this with undergrad psychology students, and her numbers are around 32% of the people doing this wrong. But in geography, I didn't get these results. So this is already a professional bias. Maybe self-selected people go for STEM type of educations, or people who come to geography might be already interested in spatial things, and they may have done stuff, so I get better results. But with high schools, I also have similar rates. So here's another demonstration of the individual and group differences. This is a map reading task. So this is one person who was supposed to find Maine and then read something here and tell us a crime rate for a particular crime here from a number. And this person did it in 11 seconds. They looked at 25 places. Each circle is an eye fixation, so it's an eye movement data. And when the circle is small, they didn't spend a lot of time there. When it's big, they spend a little bit more time. So this is a kind of a map of their eye movements. So this is my fastest participant in that experiment. Is Benedict in the room? There you are. He was a co-author in this paper. And then we have the slowest participant in that experiment. I let you compare the two. So we are here. This person is looking for Maine. What are they doing in the East Coast? Well, the West Coast, right? So we have been showing them where Maine was before the experiment began, but it's an interactive map, and they went already to the West Coast, and they got lost, and there's like 1,181 fixations here, and of course the right answer didn't come. I mean, it's obvious. So the person couldn't complete the task. Now, this is not because this person is necessarily inferior. This person might not have slept the night before, and we didn't ask them whether they were on some drugs or there was something else, and could be aspirin. I mean, not that kind of drug. But there may be a number of explanations why this went so bad. But this is the really strong demonstration of that there are differences. I use this when I'm teaching my students that if you design something and if you test on yourself, that's probably you. And this is probably one of your clients. So you have to test products on other people. You are already too much of an expert, and your friends are too, your classmates are too educated for this to actually be proper user testing. But also this can be older and younger. Now that we talk about maps, so how many of you used maps to find your way today? About half of you, the other half Did you ask around? Did you already know? All right, some of you already knew. Yeah, we have been following a GPS dot, Google Maps. Ismini now works in Google, so we have to use Google Maps. So using maps and navigating in real world, it's an everyday thing that is relevant for everyone. And this is something that's really important. It has an important connection to aging. What happens is that when people are spatially confused, especially in familiar environments, the spatial disorientation, usually it signals that something is unhealthy in the cognitive system. It's one of the earliest signs of unhealthy aging. So people actually even started to use that as a part of diagnostics. They are trying to see, okay, if something is wrong with you cognitively, that may be one of the first signs. This is not, you shouldn't diagnose yourself, but if you suspect that there's something odd and you should know and something is like regularly getting confusing, maybe it's worth talking to someone. But it is an interesting, interesting phenomenon with a lot of everyday relevance. So if you're at a certain age and if you have to go shopping and come back home, obviously we want that to be successful, and this becomes an issue to deal with. So what I'm trying to say is that aging is a problem for all of us, cognitively speaking. Information overload is a problem, again, for all of us. But there are some good news because actually it can be helped. So one thing that we did, and that's Ismini's project now, is that we looked at whether we can have people learn their past using a virtual environment and see what they remember and how much they remember. And can we make it better? Can we help them so they remember more? So for this one, what we did is we played with the levels of realism. This is literally playing with the information overload. Reality has too much information. This is why your usual maps are abstract. They remove texture and they highlight what matters. And that's the abstract cartographic maps. That's usually why they are done that way. So reality can have a lot of irrelevant information that can be destructive. So you can play with the realism and say, okay, I'm going to maybe show something, but not everything. And then we played with the position of the landmarks. So we manipulated basically the content of the scene in a virtual environment. We gave them a route learning task. We told them that you're going to be driven by someone. You are sitting in a passenger seat. Someone takes you from A to B. Try to learn this route as much as you can because you might have to navigate this on your own later. And then we looked at aging and spatial abilities in terms of individual and group differences. This is what we usually use to design experiments. So there's 3 dimensions. That's the visualization type or technology. So we have realistic, mixed, and abstract. I'm going to show examples of that to you. And we have participants that are 20 to 30-year-old and 65 to 75. And these age groups are deliberately chosen. After 75, the individual variation is too much. Some people stay really healthy and some don't. And 65 is kind of retirement age, so that's our cutoff. That starts a different life change. Then you have really also a cognitive effect on that. And then 20 to 30-year-olds, we measured them as a baseline. And obviously because we work in a university and they are easy to find. And then we have visual tasks, visuospatial tasks, and spatial tasks. Visual tasks are things like you have photography cues, you show that to people, and you say, have you seen this or have you not seen this? If I showed you the picture of the building and say, have you seen this or not, that would be photographic. Now, visuospatial is maybe you benefit from the photography, but also has an orientation type question. So if I say, here's the building, was that in your left side or right side? Or was that, heading, was that, if I want to make it harder, I say, was that north or west? So you have to also have cardinal directions. Spatial tasks have no photographic cues. They are things like, how many turns did you take? So this you could basically remember without having any visual reference technically. So we have counterbalanced for gender and expertise. They are known issues with both of them. And we repeated this 1 week later. And I thought nobody was going to do anything really, and they weren't able to solve the questions, but they did better than I thought. So dependent variables, we looked at recall accuracy, we looked at confidence. I'm going to show you both. We also have task time and eye movements, but I'm not going to cover that. So we randomize the order. That's what you do in psychological experiments. Here's the examples. So imagine that you're experiencing this in a virtual environment, and somebody says, learn as much as you can, I'm going to ask you a number of questions afterwards. This is our realistic virtual environment. This is what many VR aspires to do. So you want to have a lot of photo texture, so it looks like, reality, really. So this is a fictional city, so nobody knew anything about the city because it doesn't exist. And this is our baseline abstract condition, which has 0 photo textures. And then you have the treatment, the pill that we developed. That is the mixed realism condition, where we have placed the textures where they mattered, which is at the intersections and at the point of turn. That's where people pay attention anyway, so you basically highlight what matters, and this helps people later to remember. It's a kind of complex graphic. So this is, here you have both of these sides, it's younger people. So right after the experiment, they were asked a number of questions, and this is recall accuracy rates. And this is your older participants. So this is right after, this is 1 week later. Right after, 1 week later. So they do surprisingly well 1 week later, I have to say, because they haven't seen the video again. So they were like, have you seen this? How many turns did you take? Here's a sketch. Can you draw the sketch of the route that you took? But what is also interesting is that this is our condition that we designed deliberately by reducing the realism, but not entirely removing, trying to hit that sweet spot. It actually helps everybody, young or old. Younger people are doing a little bit better than older people overall, but their performance, the older people's performance, actually comes pretty close to younger people with this condition that we have. This is the green one in both conditions. And 1 week later, it also the differences between the mixed realism, or let's say less information overload, actually the differences become stronger. So here you have 78% to 66, here you have 71% to 45. So they forget more with the abstract and with the realistic condition, and they are able to retain more information with this what seemingly simple modification of realism. What also is, and these are all published work, if anybody is interested, we can send the publications to you. We also asked for confidence. So there's 2 groups of people who are overconfident, men and older people. Men, when they are non-experts, I don't have the slides, but this is like when they are more educated, their confidence level calibrates. But for women expert or non-expert, they have healthy levels of confidence. And older people, especially in tasks that regard memory, tend to be overconfident. This is possibly because the memories blur a little bit. You think you've been in, like if you ask me, have I been in this room before? And if I've been in a similar room, it feels like, yes, I have. Maybe I ignore some of the details. So I only register what matters. Maybe I register the size of the room, but not the texture. Something like that. So they tend to be overconfident. But what we are trying to make a point here is that we also ask people, here you have learned that particular route. How sure are you that you learned it well, that you feel confident that you now know how to get there? So with the abstract condition, older people are overconfident, and so is with the realistic condition, and it is strikingly more than the younger people. Younger people actually are slightly underconfident. And 1 week later, the confidence grows, actually. I mean, the worse they are doing, the more they feel that they actually remember something. And this, what is quite maybe a good point to make is that this adjusted information, the mixed realism, also seems to help. So when this is close to 0, it's good. And we have this green condition here. The confidence is close to 0, both now and 1 week later for older people. Here there's some explaining to do, so younger people feel a bit less confident with this condition. But we thought that, if you're a bit less confident about something that you've learned, you're training for something, you're a surgeon, you are learning how to operate, being overconfident is bad. If you are underconfident, you probably over-prepare. But if you're overconfident and you think, I'm done, I'm ready to go, you can actually harm yourself. You can, more likely to lose your way, or you can do things wrong. So this is important also, as much as it is with the accuracy. One other thing we have asked is something I'll actually show it right away, whether they prefer one or the other. There's this concept called naive realism. People like realistic displays. We all do. We like interactive, animated, 3D, and realistic. But it is known in the literature that this is not always good. Sometimes, information overload, people do better with abstract displays, or simple 2D actually can be more effective. So we asked them before the experiment, which of these three do you prefer? Younger group said 88%, the realistic condition, and older group said 97%, the realistic condition. After the experiment, we asked, which one do you prefer now? And the younger people switched, like 69% of them switched to the mixed. This is called metacognition. That's about understanding how well you've done, your own performance, and then say that, okay, if I'm doing better with this, I'm going to pick that one. So this is something that actually people with lower spatial abilities tend to fail. And older participants in our case also, some of them, 54%, still remained with their original choice. Some of them switched, and 8% switched to the abstract, which is also an interesting detail, because in any other conditions, nobody likes the abstract one. A fully abstract one is not preferred at all, except by this 8% here. And spatial abilities also decline by age. So the literature basically says that people with lower spatial abilities cannot really they don't have very strong metacognition in spatial tasks, but because spatial abilities are correlated with aging, we also see the same effect with older participants. So this is actually kind of the end of my presentation. I wanted to show you briefly a framework that I was thinking about when you prepare visual products of design, whether they are maps or other things. What kind of complexity, what layers of complexity goes in there? It's not straightforward to say here, we solved everything because we gave you the information overload literature, you know that it's 5. This is not as simple. So there's many different dimensions. We have technology and design factors. Many of us probably are in this corner. There's human factors, individual group differences. There's also the context. What is the goal of the user? What are they really asked to do? And these interact with each other. There are super factors and sub-factors. You have cognitive and perceptual factors here, things like visual abilities, the acuity of your vision drops by time, your color perception drops by time, peripheral vision weakens, stereoscopic vision weakens, your lens gets yellower, so you cannot distinguish colors. It's not as horrible as I make it sound, but it is there. And then you have cognitive differences, spatial abilities, visuospatial memory capacity, expertise, etc. And you have many other smaller factors also in the technology and design factor side. Obviously, human-computer interaction is important. Interaction paradigms are very important. Elements of design or types of display, all of that has to be deliberately chosen. Things like interface design or visual variables, which color do you use, etc. And display type, do you show in 3D or 2D or stereo or not, VR or AR. And in the context, you have low-level and high-level tasks. That's at least how I conceptualized it, that the low-level tasks are things that people do, no matter what their goal is. So if your goal would be, let's say, wayfinding, as it was in our experiment, what do people have to do is that they have to search for things and identify them and compare them. These are cognitive tasks that you can actually design and measure for. And if you're doing scene understanding or diagnostics, you will still do them. This is a framework that I picked a little bit from somebody called Knapp, the contextual, the low-level tasks. She calls them visual operators. Right, so this is, the message at this point is that we are all getting old, and if we want to access information when we are old, and we want to continue functioning, we must include this factor in our design decisions. And the good news is there are things one can do. It's worth exploring because one can actually have interventions, so design interventions that actually help against aging. And also the fact that we think about it now, perhaps a little bit ahead of the time, for our own old age, for entirely selfish reasons, would actually, we could benefit from this ourselves. But since we are 2.1 billion in 30 years down the line, many others would too. So this is where I want to leave you. I have a number of other projects. I'm not going to go into them. I just wanted to mention that I'm doing other things than aging. So I study visual variables such as shadow, color, realism, direct measurements of visual complexity, interface design, and recently I got virtual labs in education and another sort of serious games project with unhealthy aging for prediction, prevention, rehabilitation. And I have to acknowledge all the people who helped me along the line, and I have to highlight this mini one once more. Thank you for your attention. That's all I wanted to say today.
Thank you. Just go a little bit on the middle. So that people can see you.